Well, I don't think I've been this excited about the results of an experiment since my PhD. Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are going to look at these. So these are something I've been working on for a long time. I put it on the back burner for a while, but because Diamond Pacific have jumped up the prices of Nova points, I've revived the project. I realized I could make them myself, but I couldn't make them thousands at a time. So instead, I have found a manufacturer in China that can make something somewhat similar. It's not really popular. Diamond Pacific have kind of cornered the market on the Nova points. There's so many companies in China that make a bunch of wheels and stuff for lapidary work, diamond impregnated resin wheels, but these points are pretty rare. So I'm gonna need to do a couple more tweaks still. There's a few things that I'm not that happy about, but for now, this is the best prototype we've got, and it's time to do some testing. So what you can see here, going from left to right, I might use a little pointer to make it a bit clearer without my fat fingers getting in the way. So this one here is a 200, 400, 800, 1500, 3000. So if I pan backwards a little bit, we can get our Nova points and line them up. We've got the 3000 in there, 1200 in there, 600 in there, and the 280 in there. So it's a little bit staggered and then the same on the 3000 mark. And today I want to go through testing it and we'll have a good comparison. I am hoping they put up a really good fight. In terms of price, you're talking a tenth of the price. So even if they're a tenth as good, then I'm gonna call it a semi-success. But first we'll go over some of the differences. As you can see, these are much bigger than the smalls. Actually, that one might have been a large that's worn down to a small. Let me just quickly grab a large. So that's a standard large point that's been used a bit, but it isn't that worn. You can see it's much larger than the larges, which I think is a pretty good thing. The resin of the Nova points, it's hard to show this off, but it is a little bit flexible. It's not super hard, super rigid. These ones here are certainly a phenolic resin and they're cast pretty hard. So the mix is a pretty hard mix. You can see it's got all the little diamonds in it. I can chuck it under the microscope and double check the grits, but they should be pretty good. The markings on these are definitely subpar compared to the color coding of the Nova points. These have just got a little bit of paint. What I want to do is, if I can, get the factory to do these little paint jobs here, just like the sintered diamonds. This set of sintered diamonds is years old and those paints are still there. It's a really nice, solid, hard paint. I don't really care about the color of the points, as long as there's something that identifies them. Otherwise I'm going to have to make cases that are well labelled and then these have to stay in those cases and get returned all the time to the right spots. Not the end of the world. If they work, and that's what I'm really keen on. So what I'm going to do is quickly, because you can see here, brand new, they do have quite distinct mould lines. What we're going to do is get the old aluminium oxide dressing stick and we're going to grind those down a little bit just so that they come out nice and flush. That alone will be able to test the cutting power of these burrs. I'll just have to see how it goes against the aluminium oxide stick and see how quickly it chews through. But then we're going to have to get a few test stones. I'll just use some sacrificial stuff and just do a run through the entire range, going from 200 all the way through to the 3000, and see where we end up. See if it's something in comparison to where the 3000 Nova ends up. And if it is, we're going to call it a win. So let's go through the process and see how we go. Fingers crossed. Alright, starting off, have a look at this edge. That's just what we want to take off. We don't want that because it'll hit the stone or the surface of whatever you're carving and it'll kick back. So it'll bounce, it'll gouge, it's all round bad news. So we're going to use water just like we're carving a stone and rub right up against the aluminium oxide. Start off with a pretty light pressure because that edge is pretty thick and it is kicking a lot of big particles off in just chunks basically. But as soon as we get really deep into it, we'll be able to push pretty hard and just even out the burr. Wherever it's centered, it's centered. There's not much you can do about that. You can do this to change the shape as well. Don't forget the tip. But you don't really want to change the shape too much. I do like the basic shape of a point, so we're not going to do too much to that, but you'll see that it changes color a little bit. And we'll have a look at the aluminium oxide. It is cutting through way faster than I had expected. I was expecting the burr to deform much quicker than what this aluminium oxide bar is. It's pressed aluminium oxide, it's pretty hard, it's pretty sturdy, but this thing is punching through it, no problems at all. and this is it at the end. You can see it's just nice and smooth. One side isn't grinding too well, but we'll talk about that a bit more later. And you can see all those nice little diamonds are exposed. Should be pretty good. A little bit of paint still on the surface, but the most important thing is that the point and the sides there where those molding marks are nice and smooth. So I'm just feeling it with my finger, just making sure everything's got nothing spiking out of it, because that spike will cut into your stone real sharp. And here's one burr that I put aside. I was going to prepare it, but look at the mold. It's it's a little bit staggered, so the two halves have not met all that well. And then instead of working a stone, I decided to be more scientific and work on a piece of glass. Nova's at the top, the resin burrs on the bottom. And this is starting from the highest grit, going down to the lowest grit to avoid any kind of contamination issues, even though I was changing the water and everything anyway. Best to avoid it as much as possible. And with the highest grit, I pushed hard and I pushed for a long time, and it really wasn't doing much. So let's skip forward. Well, I don't think I've been this excited about the results of an experiment since my PhD. These resin diamond burrs have come out and they have produced some amazing results. In some ways, even better than what the Novas have done. So here I've got them displayed. The Nova points are along this top row here. The resin ones are along this bottom row here. Now, unfortunately, the grits don't match up a lot except for the 3000. If I use the light, you can see here that there is a little bit of marking. If I grab a tissue and really just make sure that it's scrubbed up nice and clean, the 3000 Nova has actually left a few more visible scratches behind compared to the other 3000 resin, which is almost fully polished. You can't see it visually here. Even zoomed in, you can't really see much there, but under a loop you can see a few little scratches and markings. But have a look at that. It's pretty crystal clear, whereas if you go over here to the Nova, and I try to get the light to work for me, you can see it is starting to get foggy. The 3000 hasn't done that great a job. So the diamonds in this, because the resin is so much harder, must kind of sit right up against that surface. And all it's done is a few tiny little scratches here and there, some little pits. But nothing like this, where it's starting to really fog up and starting to really leave some scratches behind. Of course, at this kind of level, there's no feel difference. So even though it looks a little bit scuffed, it doesn't feel scuffed yet. And then we go across to here. So we've got the 1200 Nova point just here. You can see it's starting to look really scratched, but still feels quite smooth. Seems fine. The 1500 over here, still smooth. But you can see it is really, really scuffed up. Scuffed up surprisingly more than the 1200 here. So the hardness of these burrs, and you'll see that when we go further down, the hardness of these burrs do cause the diamonds to act a lot harder. For some reason, the 3000 is just a strange outlier. But then again, if we look at the burr itself, the 3000 is actually a different color, and therefore a different type of resin, whereas all the other ones are this very brown phenolic looking resin. So I'm going to have to ask some questions about this one, because it seems so gentle that it's actually not really scuffing the glass much at all compared to the 3000 Nova, if I can get the light in the right spot. Right there, you can see that it looks a bit smeary. Now if we keep working our way along, you can see here the 800, 600, they seem fairly reasonable. The 800 is still scuffed up a little bit more. You can start feeling it on the surface now at that 800 and that 600. And you can see definitely not at a pre-polished stage. This is still pretty tough carving. And then you look at the 280 Nova compared to the 200 and the 400 resin. The 280 Nova is actually so much more gentle than both of these. This 400 is super rough. It is super rough, and it gets a really nice feeling finish. Like, this is the most consistent looking finish. The Novas are much harder to get that consistency on, but these were really fast, and I think that's also got to do with the hardness of the resin. I'm not decided yet on whether that's an advantage or disadvantage of this. It does, like this state, these two here, compared to here, I did have to spend significantly less time to get to this point. And if we look at the 200 versus the 280, if you have a look right along these edges, see how that's all chipping. So with the Nova points, I normally get the sintered diamond burr and I take off the edges because the Nova points are quite scared of sharp edges like this. These burrs here, they do not care at all. The edges are scared of them because they are chipping away quite a lot. Nowhere near as much as a hard sintered burr, but certainly more than the Nova. The Nova, there's just no chipping at all whatsoever. You're far more likely for the hardness of the glass or the opal or whatever stone you're working on to gouge a little line out of your Nova point. You can see here I've purposely avoided that tiny little corner because I know that will cut a line through my Nova. Whereas this one, I kind of gave it hell, and as soon as I saw that it was chipping, I hit the corner. I didn't really care, and there is no physical damage to this burr. So this is the super coarse one. So yeah, not sure if it's an advantage yet or not. I'm gonna have to work with it on a couple stones, but it instantly just took that glass down. No worries at all. And that also reminds me to show the aluminium oxide stick that I used for preconditioning all of these and dressing them, just because I had such rough kind of finish on the burr. And you can see here I spent a similar amount of time on each of them. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this one here, the coarsest one, the 200, it was actually cutting the aluminium oxide bar really quickly. The black Novas don't even do this. This is proper cutting. So that's maybe an advantage, maybe a disadvantage. It's definitely faster working, but it is also way more brutal, as you can see from the chipping of the glass and how it's eaten into this. So for speed, they are much quicker, but quicker isn't always better. And also if you look at this one, so this one's been used and it's been conditioned. You can see here, this side, fully worn down. This side, not so much. So it's not a centering issue as such. It's more that the burrs are not that well shaped. I showed you earlier, and I might pop it up on screen now. I found one in particular, it was one of the middle ones, I think it might have been the 800, had a huge mismatch in terms of the two halves that had been pressed together. So I actually swapped that burr out. It was mega out of shape. This one is a little bit. One side was definitely sticking out a lot more than the other. Same here. It took me quite a while in the adjustable chuck to get them nice and centered and balanced, which is pretty annoying. Most of that is because the paint that they've put on the shaft here, struggled to get it to sit very well in the adjustable chuck. Here you can see that this resin burr is also pretty uneven and has a lot of bits sticking out of it. This one was actually one of the better ones, so it has hit most of the surfaces, but a lot of the other ones you can see there's just one side that didn't quite meet that well, and this looks like it's still got a pretty deep edge on it, but that's dead smooth. And you can see here the mismatch where the resin is not quite as good. The quality control on these burrs is not quite there, but at the same time they're a bit of a prototype anyway, so we probably can fix that up. I'll give some feedback. It looks like I'm definitely going to be getting this factory to make some slight modifications, but that I will commit to these burrs because they are working so incredibly well. I've looked a long time for anything that gets close to the Novas, and these are just a more brutal version of these Novas here. Now in terms of wear, these were wearing pretty quickly, especially once you take off that smooth surface. And remember, this was going backwards. We were starting at a smooth surface going to a coarse one. When you're going from a coarse one to a smoother one, this coarseness here does really eat away at these burrs. I mean, you can see that they haven't been affected too badly. Like, they haven't lost any serious mass or anything, but you can see that it really has taken a lot of resin off there and fully exposed these diamonds. I also noticed that a lot more of the diamonds were kind of coming free and floating around in the water, so that could also be a little bit of a problem. Just in terms of things like cross-contamination, gonna have to be a lot more careful about that and change the water between each stage and just wash the stone in general. I don't notice that so much with the Nova points, but it was also mainly with this really coarse 200. Once you got to the 400 and beyond, it didn't seem anywhere near as bad, so it could just be the real coarse one, which is fair enough, because if you used the Diamond Pacific 60 grit, I think this one is, the green, this one also wears incredibly fast, faster than this here, so I guess it is quite reasonable that it is wearing at quite a significant rate. In conclusion, I think I found a winner. I think it's all looking amazing. There'll be a couple videos coming up where I actually use these and go through the entire process just to double check to make sure it is as good as I think it is. But really, apart from a bit of quality control issues here and there, and I'm going to have to get used to the speed at which these work. I mean, they are starting to rival a higher grit sintered diamond when you get to this 200 range. It's very brutal. Plenty more testing to come, but I think this little slide here really sums it up. And I'm going to do this with all the Nova points as well, because I can fit all of the full range of Nova points on here, and we can really have a look at what each stage does. And then people can look at their stones, because this is all just on the surface of a stone. It's just much clearer to see it on a glass slide than it is a stone, which is why I decided to go this way. If I whip out all the Diamond Pacific Nova points and just do a full grid of them, we'll be able to really have a look at what each stage is doing. And a lot of the times you can skip stages and it'll help show that as well. Incredible. I'll be stocking up on these. I've still got a whole bunch that I can test. I didn't just buy one set. I've got quite a few to play with. And you may see them come up on the store, but if I do get that far, then I'll announce that and let you guys know. And yeah, you can scoop them on up because they are definitely worth playing with. There is a possibility that I will not really be needing to buy the old Classico Nova points anymore. As good as they've been to me, they're getting harder to get and more expensive, so we could see a bit of a shift over here. But maybe I'll always offer the Diamond Pacific Nova points. They are incredible tools and they've gotten me really far, and a lot of others out there as well. But alternatives are always good, and who knows, maybe that'll help correct prices or something. I can only hope. Anyway, I'll see you guys later. I've got some opal to carve.